Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers of Washington in his monthly Artisan Showcase. I am your host, Mark Miller. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing E.C. Murray, a multifaceted creative artisan. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's great to be here.
Elizabeth is an author, editor, lecturer, and publisher who also has regular success selling books at Barbecue to You up in Gig Harbor, which I also do. And you also, though, had a previous career before you got into the whole creative writing type of world.
I did. I was a social worker for many years. I worked in the field of developmental disabilities here in Kitsap County. I had taken some time off and decided to go into the field of writing. And while my master's is in social work, I started at a community college to take my first classes. And I had always dreamed of being a writer. That led me to the University of Washington and Stony Brook in New York, Headsbrook. And I now teach creative writing at Seattle Central College.
Oh, I didn't know you were teaching writing at Seattle Central. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I guess you've been working in social work. What suddenly made you decide to enter writing and publishing?
So I stopped my career when I became a stay-at-home mom, and I wrote my first play in second grade.
Oh.
I always had a passion to write. My dream was to be a writer, but my play in second grade was about Lily and Millie go to Mars, and a tornado came and it took their house and landed on Mars. And I went to a friend's house and they were watching The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, I am not original. I can never be a writer. So I put away my writing dreams for 50 years. And then I came to know of people whose only dream in life was to be a writer, and they died not doing it. And that honestly was my motivation. If I'm going to live my passion, I need to do it now.
So you're going to publish that as a children's book now, right? Because I think it would sell as a children's book. I like the whole idea and the visual, and get somebody who's really good with with the artwork and stuff.
Yeah, and I love those turtles too, so.
So, when you decided to start writing, how did you wind up choosing the subjects for your books?
Well, my first book was actually called Life Kind of Sucks. And my daughter at the time was a teenager, and I wanted to write a book of advice. And since what child listens to their parent of that year, I decided to write a book and call it Feel Better. And I got a number of different aphorisms and some beautiful artwork and put it into a small book. And then a friend of mine said right before publication, no boy's going to read anything that says feel in it. And that's why I changed it to Life Kind of Sucks instead of Feel Better. That was my first book.
And you have a cover back there of it?
Yes, this is it. The artist, it was Jerry Austin. Unfortunately, she's passed away, but it's just a beautiful artwork mixed in with the stories. But I had an interesting experience in my life, which was in 1980. I hitchhiked from Paris to the south of France and ended up living off the grid up in the mountains, herding goats and sheep and cows, no running water. Our heat was from collecting woods out on the hillside. And I had a spiritual connection with the land, and I felt really compelled to write that story. So that's when I went to the University of Washington and studied memoir and studied literary fiction.
Okay, and that's the long way from Paris?
That's a long way from Paris. Yeah. This picture here, if we're going to talk about covers, it's a fun one. It's a picture of a goat with an Eiffel Tower in their mouth. Yeah. Because I went to Paris to be a writer and instead ended up herding goats.
So, which is a great segue into the ideas, because you've also you are a publisher. Please explain to all of the authors and writers out there the importance of cover art.
Well, cover art, of course, is absolutely essential next to the title. In this day and age, there are two things that author needs to pay attention to, and one is what the picture looks like on the book, but also what it looks like online, because so many people see a book's little 1-inch thumbnail. But a book cover needs to match the genre. So in this book cover, we have an example of what might be French wallpaper, and people have really walked by and said, "Oh, I love your cover." It was actually an artist, Lindsay Squires, who created the cover. But I'll share some mistakes I made as well.
Okay.
My next book was, full-fledged book, was this mystery, An Unfamiliar Guest, which is the story of two women who set out to prove that a young boy did not shoot anyone. A woman knew her son was a troublemaker, but he didn't shoot anyone.
Right.
So my first cover, I had a great book launch, lots of people, but this was my first cover. And I had to explain it. If you have to explain a cover, that's a good sign you've gone the wrong way. That it was like a dandelion spreading away the wings, and this was the idea. Well, the story is a mystery, and within a month and a half, I changed the cover to this one that you see, which is dark and haunting. The story is not brutal, it's not gore, it's more like Agatha Christie whodunit. It's a puzzle. It's the kind of thing, it sold really well during the pandemic when everybody was into puzzles. And a lot takes place in the woods in southern Kitsap County, or southern Kitsap Peninsula. So you can see that's a forest, and it's matched much more the genre. So a genre's whether you're doing science fiction, literary fiction, if you're doing nonfiction, the cover really has to match the content of the book.
And for some of my covers, of course, I've always tended to see, especially science fiction, is a little bit of extra color and stuff to catch the eye, because there are so many covers out there, especially in the science fiction genre. Same thing with my crime fiction. So that's the idea of also, in addition to the cover matching the genre, maybe something that catches the eye a little bit too.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm thinking of your covers that you can tell looking at them that there's going to be, they're usually dark, and you can tell that it's probably going to be an action-oriented story from the result of that. And when you're thinking about genres, is something more plot-driven or more character-driven, you can tell by how much color you put in it, for example. That helps.
And so this is more along the lines of a traditional mystery.
Correct.
Which, little explanation here, they lumped what I call crime thrillers in with mysteries. When I grew up, mysteries were Ellery Queen, the Hardy Boys, stuff like that, Perry Mason, where, like you said, you put the story out and you have all these possible victims or possible bad guys or whatever, and the reader would actually sit there and try to figure out which one was it. So if they figured it out right at the end of the book, they'd go, "See, I was right." Or if they figured it out wrong, they'd go, "Well, why did you do that for?"
That's the exact thing the reader of An Unfamiliar Guest will be looking for. Who did it? Yes. It's an old-fashioned whodunit.
So choosing a professional editor. Maybe explain what a professional editor really is and why it's important to an author.
I, again, can share my mistakes. Because any author wants an author who does their job well. And hanging out a shingle saying I'm a professional editor doesn't necessarily do the job. And I will give you an example I'm a bit embarrassed about. A long way from Paris did very well in reviews. Seattle Times called it new and noteworthy. Publishers Weekly said readers will laugh, readers will cry. Bellingham Herald, even Yakima, they saw the ARCs, which for readers who aren't familiar, that's the advanced review copies that may have typos in it. With these great reviews, I brought it to 2 people who said they would edit it. At the end of their editing, I published it, or I pressed it. It was called Placata Press, and there were so many mistakes that one of the reviewers on Amazon said, I would have given it 5 stars if it weren't for the editing problems. So I learned from that, and I took it off the market, and I actually realized that I knew somebody. I've known her for a long time. I didn't know she used to be the editor for her USC magazine. And she edited it for me and corrected them all. And I have a tip for people who, I'm assuming that we have writers out here. And I have a tip. If you find that you have many mistakes, do a new edition. I think it's really worth pulling it off the shelves. And this is a tip I was given. I got a stamp, and the stamp says, advanced review copy not for sale, includes typos. And so I put all the remaining books from the first edition, and I put them in free libraries all over.
There you go.
So I scattered them about. And so they're not wasted, but if you order my book from a bookstore or on Amazon, wherever you buy your books, you can find A Long Way from Paris. And hopefully you'll find that it's editing free.
Do you also use any of the various quote-unquote AI programs like Grammarly?
You know, grammar isn't generally a problem of mine because I had really rigorous education. But I do have dyslexia, so typos are a very big deal. And so to get back to your original question, how does somebody find a good editor? I would say 3 things. Number 1, word of mouth. Or if you hear somebody who you've heard is a good editor, see if they will read 3 or 4 pages, 5 or 6 pages, and see how they review it and send it back to you. So you get a sample. That's one suggestion. Another is looking at their credentials. One of my editor, my professional editor for A Long Way from Paris, had been an editor with one of the big 5 with Random House. Another editor that I had was through somebody I'd met when I was studying in New York, and she had been recommended, and that was Heather Lazar from Northern California, also had been working for one of the big companies. And then my final editor for the book I'm currently working on right now, called A Yellow Checked Coat, is David Downing. And he works with Reedsy, and so he was recommended, but you can see his credentials. He wrote Beneath the Scarlet Sky, has over 30,000 Amazon reviews. And today, a really good resource that I'd recommend is called Reedsy, R-E-E-D-S-Y. And A.J. Banner, who's actually a Port Orchard, Seattle writer, does editing through them as well. She's published 15 books traditionally.
So Reedsy is one of the go-to places, because I've seen that name floating around a lot.
Yes. I would recommend Reedsy. And both David Downing and A.J. Banner also work through them.
And then, of course, like I said, you do have these quasi-AI things out here, and like for me, I use Grammarly as I write, but then I have a professional editor who goes over everything in addition to that.
Great, great. Sounds like grammar is to you like spelling is to me.
Well,
we need this little bit of help.
Grammarly does both. And the thing is once it learns the way you write, because there is ability to learn, which I didn't even know existed in it, but it does, it will start making some additional suggestions as to sentence structure, stuff like that. And you can either accept them or not. But a lot of the times you read it and you go, oh, that's actually a better way of writing that,
Great.
without changing your voice. That's the important thing. If you're going to be using something like that, even if you're using an editor, you kind of have to make sure that you're not losing your voice. You're not writing like that person wants you to write. I mean, yeah, they want you to write correctly, but you don't want to lose your voice.
I think that is an essential point. Very, very well said. And that's why being able to give your sample pages and seeing how they write them is really good. For myself, I think that one of the biggest problems authors have is not doing their research ahead of time.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore knowing, I feel like before you're going to put out money for a professional editor, it's important to self-edit and know the basics, like how many words are the baseline for your genre,
right,
because that varies from genre to genre. Being able to look through, do I have more showing than telling? In literary fiction, you want to have more telling.
Yeah.
In commercial fiction, you want to have more showing. We call something a sagging middle. Often we have the beginning really strong, the end really strong, but does it have a sagging middle? Does the main character grow? Do they have an arc? Does the plot have complications that get worse and worse? Is there a clear resolutions? And it's really, there's another book I'd like to recommend, which is called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. Mm-hmm. And I think before, you can save a lot of money if you do your self-editing before you send it to beta readers, who, if readers don't know, Mark, you mentioned beta readers. Beta readers are people who will read your book and give you feedback on it, generally other writers or else really strong readers. Then go out and spend some money for an editor.
And so as the author's going around writing, and you've got an excellent book there, of course, Writers Unblocked, about writer's block. And I made the smart aleck comment that I guess along the ways of Hemingway, if you really want to unblock yourself, sometimes a good glass of scotch helps. But what helps an author, a writer, developing characters and actually doing the storytelling? Because I think there's a confusion when they started talking about show, don't tell. To me, you have to be able to tell a story. It can't all be Hollywood, Marvel films, explosions and everything.
Well, I can say I just saw Mission Impossible last night. and my husband and I were leaving, realized, okay, that was 45% chase, 45% 45% fighting, 10% story. So yes, absolutely. We use the terms in our writing classes, narrative versus scene. So scene is more the action where people are behaving, and narrative, it may have the backstory in it, may have in a memoir, musing and reflection is an enormous part of a memoir. And so having that balance is just very important, and all readers need to look out for that. But for readers, you mentioned this Writers Unblocked. I have a website called writersconnection.org, and in that website I interview a lot of the authors in the Puget Sound who have been really successful. So we have a number of writers who have been on the New York Times bestseller list. Most recently we have Claire Detterer, who is a star here in Kitsap County. We have Debbie Maycomer. We've had Eric Larson. All different genres. So at the end of my interviews, I always say, what are your tips for aspiring writers? And most of the time, it's sit in your butt and write. That's usually what it is. But I will say one of the biggest tips for me when I get stuck is just set your alarm for 45 minutes, because anybody can write for 45 minutes. And usually after that, you can write for more than that. I just do a little plug for my own personal website, ecmurray.com. I have 18 tips for how do you get your mojo coming.
Oh, there you go.
Because, yeah, we do all get stuck once in a while.
So, kind of getting on closing, what are some of your future plans?
Well, right now I'm working on a book called The Yellow Checked Coat, and most of my books. Took 4 years. This took 4 years. The Yellow Checked Coat took 5 years, and it's the story of an unlikely trio who are searching homeless camps in Seattle for this young man's mother who is missing. And so I ended up interviewing a lot of people who were connected with the homeless community, people at Mary's Place, the women's shelter, the magazine Real Change. I distributed water and visited with people. But when my book originally finished, people felt as though there wasn't enough of the story. So I had to change it around and put that meat as part of the background of the story as opposed to the forefront. And I feel like I might be done that last draft that I've just finished.
Experience, especially I guess you'd say life experience, or if you have a career, for me, I try to write based on my experiences and the people I know and stuff, as opposed to trying to write what you think is going to sell. And would you kind of agree with that?
I can't imagine writing for what's going to sell because it changes so quickly, right? Yeah. You can't predict what's going to be going on in 3 years. So I write for what is in my heart. This I felt compelled to write. Writing a memoir is really emotionally draining, especially a personal one. I grew up writing mysteries. I wanted to write a fun mystery. So that was my second one. And then this one was based on my experience was teaching at Seattle Central College.
Well, thanks again, Elizabeth, for coming here to the BCAT studios. So
thank you, Mark. It's been a delight.
Now I get to do my typical closing spiel. Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers has been interviewing and filming various creatives in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television for several years. I always want to thank all the viewers for tuning in to Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers production. I also, once again, always want to thank the BCAT staff. If they're not here, we would not be able to put on this production. This broadcast interview is scheduled later in the month at 6 p.m. every Saturday on on Channel 3 on Astound Wave Cable and Channel 12 on Comcast. Keep in touch with us on our Facebook pages for updates on what creatives we will be interviewing and also other activities we're involved in. Look for the yearly Blackberry Festival and Kitsap County Fair and Stampede because Kitsap Literary Artists always has a booth. We at KLAW have a mission statement to help artists and writers become known to the public and expose their artistic endeavors to the residents of Kitsap County and the world. Thus, we plan to continue this endeavor as long as the BCAT staff and the viewing public support us. We charge no dues, no fees to do these shows. The only expense involves various venue fees, like Blackberry Festival. KLAW exists for the artists and authors to help with marketing, distribution, and publicity. We meet each month on the first and third Wednesdays at Sparrow's Pizza on Kitsap Way in Bremerton, Washington, around 7 p.m. Also, for filmmakers and actors, we have a related group, Kitsap Peninsula Filmmakers, which meets on the second Tuesday of every month at the Family Pancake House on Wheaton Way, once again in Bremerton, also at 7 p.m. Everyone is welcome. There's also other groups that assist in both authors and also assist with Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers. The Blue Forge Group, a 501c3 nonprofit, which also encompasses films, publishing, comics, music, and artwork, who is also my publisher, tries to assist local artisans in ensuring that they get their creative works out there. They also, through Blue Forge Films, helps us put these interview shows up on YouTube. In closing, I'm really glad that Elizabeth was able to come here, and I hope everyone has a pleasant day and a productive and fascinating year. Until next time, I am Mark Miller with Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and the Blue Forge Group. Have a very pleasant day.